beginning, Tim, it'd be really interesting to talk about the background that you've had in working with computer games and what got you interested, because you've been doing it for some time now.
Yep. Yeah, sure. I've always enjoyed playing games myself.
Yeah.
When I started teaching here at Auburn, there was a teacher here, Sandra Lake, that got us signed up to the Acme ScreenIt competition in 2010, and at the time we were looking at doing film and animation, and there was an option for game, and we promoted student choice with that competition. And to be honest, we didn't expect any students to take up the game component, which we were probably at the time relieved about, just because we knew nothing about it. But there was a group of boys that actually took that challenge up, and we were happy to go along with it. And pretty much on their own accord, with only a little bit of help and guidance along the way, that they ended up not only winning the game making competition component, but they won the overall competition with the game, which we had little to do with, which really had an impact in terms of student engagement. It was obvious, and these boys were basically developing it on their own at home. They were coming into school and they were sharing their plans, and we're giving them feedback and whatnot. But it really then set off a trigger with some of the other kids in terms of ways that they can express themselves and be creative, and ways that they can actually go about maybe entering that competition the following year. So the following year we went through and actually entered in the ScreenIt competition again, and we had a huge take up for games. So then it was obvious that I sort of had to look a little bit more into what game making is about and how it can be facilitated in the classroom, and we've continued to do that each year since then.
So one of the things I'm really interested in this first group of boys is you're working in a 5-6 combined class, aren't you?
Yeah.
So were those boys all in grade 5 or all in grade 6, or a mix?
It was a mix. So there was 4 boys, 2 were grade 6, 2 were grade 5, and generally as each year we've allowed the students, or we've offered the students the option of picking whether they want to do a film, game or animation, and that's offered to all the 5-6 students, and then would form groups within each of those clusters, and they would make up a mix of boys, girls, grades 5s and grade 6s.
Okay.
Predominantly though, interestingly, I found that it was a majority of boys would pick the game, but that was just our observations.
Yeah.
And that may be a perception.
No, certainly. I know the group last year and the year before, there were always more boys than girls. Although last year there were more girls doing it than there were the year before.
That's right.
Because the year before, I think there were only 2 girls, whereas last year there was probably about a third.
Yeah, the year before, so 2012, there was probably about 3 girls out of about 30. And the following year, so last year in 2013, there was probably about a third of the girls.
Yeah.
A third of them were girls, sorry.
Yeah. And maybe part of that was that it switched over to Trish, a female teacher?
Possibly, yeah, that could be a factor in it. We did try to sell it more with the girls, and it was also a factor because we basically said had they have done a game or a film or an animation the previous year, they had to pick something new. Yeah. So a lot of the girls and boys that were in game hadn't done game before, and the ones that were forced to pick something else just because we felt it was important to expose them to different experiences. And that was, we structured that intentionally to sort of promote people to be challenged, because that's an important part of learning, and also to expose the girls and the boys that hadn't done it before to this different way of doing things.
Now, just a couple of things. What are some of the benefits of basing it all around the ACME competition?
We found that the ACME competition provided a framework in terms of the students working towards a particular theme. So it opened it up, the learning in terms of literacy, that the students were actually addressing a purpose and a theme, and they were making their creative product or this expression of their ideas, and it was targeted towards a specific audience, specific purpose and a specific theme. So previous themes that we've worked around in the competition are belonging, respect, environment and connect. So the students would explore those themes, and that would time well in terms of developing the students' understanding of themes and values that are relevant to their part in society. And also on a literacy level, it would also help to provide a focus and a framework in terms of producing a piece of work for a purpose and audience.
Yeah, and also I guess one of the other things too is that there's now, it's become like an established tradition of working with the ACME competition. So even though it's only been 4 years, that's the majority of the life that the kids coming in this year have been at the school. So, since they're in grade 1 or 2, they've seen other kids producing things for this competition and having in their minds, this is something I'm going to do.
Yeah, definitely. And it's sort of, I guess in some ways, built up that culture, and there's been a series of expertise that have sort of been handed down as well from, sixes sharing with fives and informal sharing that's happening outside of the classroom as well.
Yeah.
Where students being exposed to game maker games, for example, or scratch games that other students have made. And often we find them when we've explored games that they're already pulling up ones from previous years that their brothers or their brothers' friends made, or their sister was involved with, or whatever it may be. So it's interesting in terms of how the culture has sort of developed. Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess you've already mentioned 2 of the programs you've used, Scratch and Game Maker. They've been the main 2 programs that the school's used.
Yeah, they're the main 2 that we've used. And again, in previous years we put that down to student choice. And in the first year, I did recommend Game Maker because it was the only one that we were sort of familiar with.
Well, and it was also, 4 years ago, it was the only one that was easily accessible. I think MIT have done a lot of work to Scratch since then.
Yeah, and then after that sort of process and being involved with the Screen It project, we were exposed to other programming programs that we could use, game making programs that we could use, and the students themselves brought a range of knowledge in terms of programs that they were familiar with, perhaps maybe not have used in the past, but they were familiar with. So one of our early sessions, we actually played around with a variety of different programs that the students were saying that they wanted to try. And over the course of a session or 2 or 3 sessions, in some cases, we sort of narrowed it down to Game Maker and Scratch being the most accessible based on their prior skills or skills that have been passed on, or ones that they just found were a bit more accessible for them. But there were a range of other ones that we sort of experimented with at the time. Some were a little bit more complex. Some were too
modular.
Yeah.
Some of them are modular, aren't they?
Yeah, and they just weren't. And some of them they weren't attracted to just in the visual aspect in terms of what it would produce. I think Kodu, for example, some of the boys didn't like the way that it actually aesthetically appeared once they actually designed something, whereas other ones were just a bit too complex.
Yeah, I think some of the kids might have used Kodu last year though, didn't they?
Last year, potentially last year, but in prior years
they didn't want to do
more
it.
choice. So
it's interesting. So that's a really interesting theme from this too, that when you give the students a choice, you have to kind of run with that. And how that might play out in the classroom and manage it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think from the time in 2011 and 12, particularly when we were facilitating it then, I didn't want to narrow it down to just ones that I was familiar with, because it was obviously clear that from my first experience that the kids often knew more about it than I did, and it was more than my role just to sort of facilitate how they share that information, how we can share skills and learn from one another, and then empowered the students to actually take on those expert roles a lot more.
Yeah, that's great.
Which was quite conducive to good learning.
So what do you think the students learn from making a game? What do they learn from making and designing and
I think there's a range of learning that comes out of making games. From the way that we facilitate it, there's collaboration in the way that the students work within groups and how they deal with differences of opinion, how they share ideas, how they review those ideas. I think there's a range of learning in terms of the creative and critical thinking, how they structure their ideas, how they develop their ideas from just ideas to an actual product, how they critique those ideas, how they critically assess each other's ideas. There's learning in terms of problem solving. I mean, a lot of them are dealing with programs that they've never used before. They're dealing with having to think logically in terms of how to solve problems that come up. And to be honest, yeah.
The budget you give them, that adds a really interesting dimension.
Yeah, so
Want to talk about that?
Last year we threw in a bit of a real life element in terms of them having to work with a budget. So they were allocated a key amount. I think it was probably about $10,000 or thereabouts.
$10,000, I think.
And each student took on a role. So there were roles such as a designer and a producer, a director, a accountant, and each of these roles basically had specific responsibilities. So we were trying to instill with our 5 6ers the values of responsibility and being accountable. And so within those there was a job description, and they had to manage their budget. If they took too long to meet certain deadlines, they'd have to pay for extensions, they'd have to pay for their time, in terms of how they chose to spend their budget, and there were different parameters around expenses.
And they had to buy the teachers' help?
They had to buy teachers' help. They were also paid extra money, so they had cash incentives to do things such as make how-to videos, and a range of other things that would actually contribute.
I loved that. I thought that was great.
It would help to contribute to the learning of others. So that was something that we really wanted to facilitate. In the past, we did that. It was and students were using blogs to post how-to videos, so right. How to make a sprite, or how to make a title page, or how to create a credits page, or whatever it may be. And this, in terms of having the budget, it provided more of an incentive in terms of them to actually share and contribute ideas, because often they'd get quite focused in their own ones. So it was about promoting that.
Yeah, I loved that budget. I thought it gave a really great extra dimension to the way that the program had been running.
Yeah, and the intention was to make it a bit more real life and realistic.
Yeah.
And as we know in the real world, that's how we operate. Plus, obviously, it gave a bit of a maths component to it as well, from a teaching point of view, in terms of meeting curriculum outcomes. It was a popular sort of way to go about.
And it also sort of acted as a bit of a productive constraint that kids would. A lot of them were really concerned about the time frame, and I think a number of the kids thought about what they were doing in terms of completing it. They said, oh no, we can't do that. I heard them say things like, we can't do that because we won't have enough time, we won't get it finished.
Yeah.
And so I think it had quite a big impact on people's thinking.
And I guess it sort of helped push along their personal learning in terms of time management as well. And that was probably something in the past where there was time management elements to it, where you could,
it's really hard.
With a game, you can, or any creative product, you can always continually feel the sense to fine tune it. But this actually put a deadline on it. We were working towards a deadline, so we tried to help sort of facilitate that by setting up objectives along the way. And the students seemed to respond to that, or at least respond to that in the sense that they were learning from that experience and having to work to certain deadlines and keep themselves on track and self-regulating that as well.
So, apart from making games, what other ways have you used games?
I've used Minecraft in the classroom before for maths, which was interesting because I was aware that there was a contingent of students in the class that were using Minecraft at home, and they were sharing components of that within school as well, and so tried to incorporate that into some of the maths activities, and we're looking at things such as Cartesian planes, and I figured we figured that it was a pretty good way to actually demonstrate Cartesian planes. So rather than playing regular battlefields and battleships, we were incorporating the virtual world to actually create not just an X-Y axis but also a Z axis, which is quite difficult to create in a real world. And interestingly enough, probably my most disengaged student, which is one of the reasons, one of the big impacts of using games, is that those students that aren't actually engaged with the learning, or they're bored with more traditional methods, that they tend to get some of those students to really take to it, and one of those particular students actually, who was disengaged with more traditional methods, really took to it and actually developed the whole playing field. Once I sort of just brainstormed the idea that I was thinking about doing this thing, and he actually set up the server with me. through the computer, and then actually developed the playing field for the students to actually use this environment at home in his own time, and then brought it to school the next day to tell me that he'd done this in his own time, and then facilitated that lesson with groups as they went through the rotations.
Fantastic.
So he took quite a bit of ownership from that, and then took more of an expert lead role later in the term when the game making came up, and was able to actually help others. There was a sense of heightened self-esteem from that, which was a concern.
And did that move
student.
across into other areas of his relationship with you in the class, or?
I think in terms of our relationship, yes, definitely. In fact, he was so taken by that, he actually came up to me randomly, and this could be a student, that could be one of the particular student could be reluctant to talk if not engaged, and actually told me that he wanted to be a game maker when he got older, and he'd come back and give me some money apparently when he made the money. He knew how poorly teachers were paid.
That's great.
not that I told him, but he felt the need to let me know that. But he obviously was inspired by that, and took a lot of reward out of that experience.
Well, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's interesting too that, you know, just that it's that old thing in education, isn't it, about engaging someone on their level of personal interest.
Yeah.
And it can just be one little thing that kind of opens up the key to their learning a bit beyond that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the level of conversation that actually developed from there, and it was really an avenue that I could target his particular learning as well, and it was interesting, even just the conversations would then have about other programs that could potentially be used, and he was really was educating me. He was educating me. I'm going to be naive about it. He was educating me.
Yeah.
and letting me know about what works and what doesn't work, and then other activities when I would use IT and any IT in the classroom. He was able to be an expert in that field, and I was quite happy for him to take a bit of a lead in that regard.
Which is really great. So just thinking about sort of the IT in the school generally, and about games in particular, moving forward, what kinds of practices are there in the school that are helping to make it sustainable as an ongoing kind of school venture? And what are some of the challenges and affordances of doing this kind of pedagogy in a school?
It can depend on the teachers at the start. I found as a classroom teacher that there can be a reluctance for buying if you're just showing people. And people will immediately look at some people, in fact, people respond in different ways. Some people will immediately take that up and have a go, and you know, you talk about your innovators and whatnot, and the people that are sort of your majority will sort of dabble in it if exposed to it and given the time and resources to have a go, and then you also get your blockers. And that impacted in terms of the dynamics of different teams, whether that was taken up or not. I think a key thing at the moment is we've probably got a platform at our particular school at the moment where we can really develop the pedagogy and how we actually use games in the classroom, and trying to look at engaging our students a lot more and making things that are a bit more relevant in terms of those, and some of those outcomes that I talked about earlier in terms of, you know, how they collaborate with others, how they're thinking critically and creatively, problem solving, and even looking broadly, you know, in terms of how we connect with other countries and communication wise. And we've actually looked at getting ourselves, we've actually involved in a project in its early stages with the new pedagogies for deep learning with Michael Fullen, which is looking at a lot of those, I think they call them the 4 Cs at the moment, with collaboration and communication and critical creative thinking and whatnot, and we're looking to sort of implement that within how we move forward from here, and making that more consistent across the school in terms of looking at how we're making deeper learning and learning more stimulating. And
how can you expand it out from the work that you've done initially?
Yeah.
How might that sort of spread through?
Well, I think it's not really just the work that I've done, but there's other staff such as Trish Canny in 5-6 who's actually really taken that on and taken it forward, and it was clear that if you find the right mechanisms for it, and you can build a bit of weight, that you can get a bit of build a bit of capacity, and people will take to those ideas and actually learn from those experiences. And I think once you take the initial steps to have a go at it, just like we encourage our students to have a go at things, and that, you know, there will be failure on the way and we got to take risks.
A lot of teachers have played games themselves, and some of them have always known that educational potential, and others have thought about it as, no, that's what I do as recreation. But then there are some people who have never particularly played but really see the potential educationally, and often they shift really quickly in the way that they do it, because they don't actually understand how to play or really what happens in the play, but they're thinking about, but they know that it's going to do something, and so they sort of leap ahead a bit. What do you think the educational potential of games is?
Moving into the future? I think the educational potential for games is massive. I think, we're preparing kids for society, for the real world. You look at the real world, the gaming industry is bigger than the music industry, bigger than the movie industry, bigger than, you know, books at this rate. It's one of the biggest industries, and yet the creative processes that go into that are probably undervalued in some regard, because it's probably got this negative stigma attached to it if you're a gamer, that it's a waste of time to some people. But I think the perception is wrong, basically. I think that the potential is huge for games in the classroom and how we actually make games, and I think that the kids are actually finding that relevant. I think traditional methods can be a bit boring for kids. I don't think data reflects that, and I think the kids are saying that they're interested in games, the kids are showing that they're interested in games. Game seems like a pretty obvious vehicle to actually explore learning. And we can actually break those down with kids. We can look at components within how games are made, or using games to actually benefit their learning in various ways. Whether it is, you know, how they collaborate with others, thinking creatively, thinking critically, even, you know, the potential of sharing games internationally. I mean, we're looking at global markets as well, whether we're learning from each other and each other's games, or getting, you know, understanding of different cultures and their interpretations of different things through games, or, you know, and from a teaching point of view, the links for numeracy and literacy for those that are really concerned about that data, which is important, because kids need to be able to count, they need to be able to read and develop those skills even further. But the capabilities within game to do that are evident. I mean, we've been doing it. I'm not saying we as in here, but people are doing it all around the world. You know, whether it's looking at, you know, themes for games, or narratives within games, or character development, or whatever angle you want to take on it, or whether it's, you know, Cartesian planes for game design for your older grades, or you know, working towards budgets to develop games, or looking at angles within games, or using Minecraft for whatever it may be. You know, there's avenues there. We're talking about dropping statistics around the world for student engagement.
Yeah.
Around the world, and particularly boys, and I find that concerning. Yeah. I find it concerning.
That was one of the major things that came out of the last PISA study, was like how much that disengagement had increased everywhere. So,
the question is, what are we doing to address that? How are we going to make this more engaging? And if they're seeing games as relevant, maybe we need to start listening to, we do need to start listening to them more, and what they're actually interested in, and addressing those interests, because whatever we've been doing isn't really working. I mean, we're learning, they're learning, but the learning could be improved.
Yeah, exactly.
They could be actually if they're actually engaged in what they're doing, imagine what they could achieve, what we could achieve.
And aren't you grateful that the people that are teaching care about engagement? Like, nobody cared that I wasn't engaged with the SRA cards.
Well, yeah.
Nobody cared about that. They just cared that I did the...
the different departments of education are getting data, and agencies are collecting data on student engagement. And like you said, probably, 15, 20, 30 years ago, people probably didn't really care, as long as you could read and and write and count and multiply, then, you know, you can get a job. But, you know, we're looking at skills where we want students to become, you know, entrepreneurs essentially, or, you know, to think differently and to be adaptable to different, you know, global needs that are going to be present in the future. And I don't know, you'd want to sit back and wonder whether we've done the right thing, or whether we've equipped our students enough to be able to take on those challenges. And I think gaming is something that they're engaged with, something that provides those skills, and it still is an avenue to teach, you know, your more traditional curriculum outcomes, which are essential. I'm not denying that, they are essential. It definitely has huge potential.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thanks so much, Tim. It's been really great to talk with you.
And thank you to, I mean, you guys are doing a fantastic job in researching the fact that there's a whole research and the funding going on around game-based learning, and you guys have given us a lot of professional development around that, as in Deacon and yourself and Christy and Catherine, and yeah, that's been really helpful for us as well, and even establishing relationship with Fitzroy North and some of the other schools.
I reckon in Victoria that's been one of the strengths of the program. Those visits.
Yeah.
Like my favourite one was when Frank's class from Kew, the Year 9s, came to Con's class and saw their games. That was such an amazing day.
Yeah.
Because the Year 9s, they really were amazed at how good the work the Year 3s were.
Yeah.
And I did this interview with them afterwards, and they were just, they were kind of really surprised, and it was really interesting because, you know, you and I can reflect on how much education's changed since we were at school. And, you know, for me, that was, you know, when I was, like, I'm 50 next year. So, you know, that was like 32 years ago since I finished school. So, you know, we're talking 45 years since I was in prep. Yeah. And, you know, but for these kids, it was only, you know, they're in Year 9. And so it was only 10 years ago that they were in grade 3 when, oh no, less, 6 years. 6 years.
Yeah,
I
6 years.
Can't do maths. 6 years ago since they were in grade 3. And they were just reflecting on how much the whole sort of approach had really changed in that time with respect to technology.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
It was interesting actually, because one of the students that was in that, I was there that day, as you probably might recall, but one of those students that was actually in the Year 9 class, I taught when he was in year...
Are you kidding?
It would have been in Year 5.
Yeah.
He was in my class in Year 5 when I first got here.
Yeah.
And even then it was different.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. So, you know, so most of them would have come from schools more close to Kew High, but some,
And where there was only a handful of students that,
from here, that's amazing.